really excited to have you guys this morning because you guys have a special opportunity as part of our year-long Apollo at 50 celebration. Okay? So this morning, we have crew member from Apollo 7. It was the first manned Apollo mission, and his name is Walt Cunningham. Okay? And Walt served in the military, and that's how he learned to fly a plane, and he was a fighter pilot. Okay? And then he actually went to school in California. He went to the University of California and graduated with a degree in physics. Okay? In total, okay, he spent time on the Apollo Mission 7 for 11 days. Okay? They were testing things for those moon missions that came later. And he has more than 260 hours spent in space. Okay? So if you guys have questions for him as he's speaking, he's encouraging you to raise your hand and he'll call on you. All right? A lot of what today is he's going to tell a little bit about himself, and then he's going to look for you guys to interact. Okay? All right. So please join me in welcoming Walt Cunningham.
Thank you. Oh boy, it's loud. Actually, this is interesting to me. Kind of look at a group of you. How many of you have an interest, a personal interest, not just being polite, a personal interest in space today, a space program today? Yeah, see, more and more people have been up in space. Well, I think I was the 18th American that got up there, and now I think they're up to 300 and something. So you got a good opportunity. And I don't intend to give you any lecture about anything, because I'm here to pick your brain and answer what you say. So you need to make sure you got enough confidence to ask a question. And I don't care how stupid the question might be, or how correct that might be, I'll give you my honest opinion. I don't know any better than that. So we'll see how that goes. She's talking about education. I don't consider my life in the area of education to be ideal on things. It worked out fine for me, and it's got a lot to do with mental attitude. But I'll run through that just quickly here. When I was in school, in high school, that's about 60 years ago almost, 70 years ago, excuse me, and some people in my class were in the Army Reserve, and they were going to Korea, they were getting shot and what have you. I decided that I didn't want to do that. I was working all the time, very, very poor family. One of the benefits of my life today is having to get by and make it at all stages of my life. Today, there's an effort, I think, to discourage that. A lot of people are looking to be taken care of all the time. And it's fine for them when they do, but I want you to really realize, in the end, what really happens is how well you are committed to what you're going to do, and the confidence you have in your capability of doing it. She said I was UCLA college. I started in college as a freshman when I was 25 years old. That's because I joined the Navy. I won't tell you how. Eventually, I ended up going into the Marine Corps as a fighter pilot in Korea. I always wanted to be a pilot from the time I was in grammar school, because I used to watch the films there in Venice, and the actors were out there. They were all supposedly outstanding pilots. So it appealed to me anyway. And so I ended up deciding, it's in the Marine Corps, and the situation was going on, and I was loving my flying. I was in the first manned twin jet night fighters up there. Great experience. But an event went on when I was in Korea, which made me decide I was going to go to college. Then it took me another year and a half, 2 years of making the proper efforts in the Marine Corps to get into the reserve squadron right there next to UCLA and to start college. And I was working part-time, working at the Rand Corporation, excuse me, And eventually I applied for the NASA, and I got selected. I had my bachelor's degree, my master's degree in physics, and I was down in what was supposedly was the last year of getting my doctorate in physics. I didn't ever get that because I got selected by NASA. Long, tough case, but I was fortunate to get selected my first attempt. And then, when I left NASA after eight years, I was at NASA, and I decided I ought to probably get out and make a better education. And I went to work for NASA. I don't know if anybody would guess how much I started my pay for there. I'll tell you anyway, $13,100 a year. That's what I went to work for as an astronaut. And I remember thinking I was very fortunate. When I left NASA 8 years later, I worked my way all the way up to $25,000 a year. Excuse me. So lived out in there, always kept my mind open for education. I encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to not expect everybody else to take care of you. Take care of yourself. Stick your neck out yourself on that. So when it comes to education, I'm sure most of you right now would be agreeing. How many of you want to go to college? See, look at that. Amazing. There's a couple of old guys sitting here that didn't make their hand up. They must have gone already. So you give some thought. Ask me questions. You're free to ask about any aspect of it. The first thing almost everybody asks is, were you afraid? We can talk about that if you want to go through any, but I just tell you no. Then we can talk about the rationale of how that happens on it. But I want to be the guy that answers the questions. I'm not here to give you lectures unless you set the spot for them. So who out there is smart enough to ask a question? And you've already given some thought to your questions. Okay, you can ask the question. Make it loud.
How many years of college do you usually have to get in NASA?
Excuse me. I'm not a technician here. How many years? I recommend that you get 4 or 5 years of college. And that's my recommendation for the minimum. But one of the things when they compete about, the people that are doing the selection, they look at how much education you have. So the more education you have can be a plus to it. But back in the late 50s and the early 60s, I think 1 or 2 of the Mercury guys had not had college. And it started building up from there. By the time I got in the selection round, and we ended up, took about 6 months to go through all the applicants they'd had at that time. Everybody had to be a fighter pilot. Most of us were test pilots. And the education, we had 1 person in our group. When our group of 14 was selected, that brought us up to 30 total. And I think in our group, 1 of them had a PhD. And I was probably close on the other one, because I still had at least a year to go to get a PhD. And as time went on, people started adding more and more to their college. Today, I'd be amazed if virtually almost everyone has at least a master's in that. So if you want to become an astronaut or even work in space seriously, I suggest you do apply yourself and get the education. Because some of the stuff I say will not be too acceptable politically today, but I'm going to tell you what it is anyhow. It's an opinion. No matter what they tell you, everybody is not equal in anything. And what we ought to be making sure of is that everybody has an equal opportunity. an equal opportunity to do something, if it's, whether it's education or job or anything else, and then make sure that they're judged fairly. But believe me, just because you're there and you live and you exist, that doesn't automatically think you're going to be a success. So you've got to learn how to work and apply yourself. I don't know, did I answer your question, or? Hello? Did that answer your question? Okay, because I recommend the education, I really do. You know, it's in a variety of areas. I thought the engineering and physics was a very significant area for that. Okay, good. There's a question way up there.
What was it like in space?
What?
What was it like in space?
Say it one more time.
What was it like in space?
What was it like in space? Well, that was the nicest part of all the work that I was doing there. And I'd say our crew, Wally Sherrod, Don Isley, and I, and it was Wally's third flight, it was my first flight, also Isley's first flight. It was like a relief from the job, because we had things that we were testing. It was the first time flight that spacecraft had flown. I'll tell you in a second what it took to get there on it. But we had been working for that particular mission, and overall we ended up with about 3 years of direct training on the objectives for that mission, testing it for the first time. And I can tell you this, on it, it ended up being, in fact today, 50 years later, another couple months, that'll be 51 years later, and today that is still the longest, the most efficient, the most successful first test flight of any new flying machine of any kind ever. So that comes about because of the work and the preparation and what all you have to do on it. So I think that it was very nice feeling to have our crew there be able to perfect what they had to do, because we helped develop the system. We then provided a lot of the testing of the systems, and we operated them. Now there were pluses and minuses on the operations. There's been people in Mercury that were fortunate to have survived the situation because they could handle something that didn't work perfect. Same way in Gemini, same way in our Apollo mission. When Apollo started off, the first crew, Apollo 1 is, as you know it, that was Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. And all of those folks had college degrees. And they ended up, well, they were Apollo 1. Apollo 2 was Wally Sherrod, Don Isley, and I. And we were trying to get started, working with the contractor, testing things, helping design some of them to make it right for space. All of the work with the contractors who had all been developing aircraft for testing before, and they were very good at that, and they developed dozens of different kind of planes. When it got down to the spacecraft, there was just a few. And as we helped them and started making changes, we ended up performing tests and then helping develop certain changes, which didn't make them too happy. They fought some of the changes we were trying to get in there. Well, the schedule kind of slipped. After we'd been training and testing for 8 months, our crew, that was Apollo 2, they canceled it. They canceled the mission. And for some other different kind of reasons I'll tell you, but they moved us in as the backup crew for Apollo 1. And we were working with them for about 3.5 months, I think it was. The Apollo 1 crew is the ones that did. How many here have heard about the Apollo 1 fire? Yeah. So the crew died in a fire that they had on the pad. And we had performed almost exactly the same test in their spacecraft the night before. And we were waiting, this is on a Friday, and I can remember our crew, we were being busy down at the Cape. We were going to fly back that night. We thought we were trying to wait so we could get all 6 of our airplanes back together doing that. And it got back to late afternoon. We ended up saying, no, we're going to go home because they haven't gotten the test. The difference between those tests, we had performed it with the hatch open, so we weren't on 100% oxygen. And when you're on 100% oxygen, they also, you've got, filtering for carbon dioxide and things like that. So by the time we get back from Florida, we're back at Houston, at Ellington Field, the crew was lost. And they were gone. So then we got assigned, a week or 2 later, we got assigned the prime crew of the first mission. And that started a repair for anything that could possibly have caused the fire, and a lot of other things that we were able to add because of the delay now. But we're still fighting. The reason that that program was created was to beat the Russians to the moon. You don't hear it too much as political today, and we're working very close with the Russians today. But back in those days, people didn't talk about it too much, but we all knew that our object was to beat the Russians. And the Russians didn't even admit they were in that race. We knew, but they didn't even admit it publicly until at least 10 or 12 years, I think, afterwards they finally talked about it. So 21 months later, our crew, which was better prepared than it would have been back when we got that delay, then we launched on the first manned Apollo mission. And it was tremendously pleasing, to some degree exciting, but we were proud of the opportunity we had. And the Russians never made it to the moon yet. Yes, up there.
What training did you need to go into space?
A little louder, please.
What training did you need to go into space?
What training do you need to go into space? The training has evolved because the people performing it have evolved also. But it takes a pretty long period of time. First off, to become an astronaut, there's a lot of training you go through, survival and stuff like that. That before you're even on a crew, you go through a lot of that, like a year's worth of training. But then when you're on the crew, you have to address your interests and get your capability in areas that you're trying to do with that. What they've been flying now for, well, they cut it out about 5 years ago, but the space shuttle was the mission. The whole world has been changing on it. Back during Apollo, we flew 11 different missions before it was over. On the space shuttle, I think they did 135 different missions on it for a number of years. But they finished that about, 5 or 6 years ago now, I think. And everything we do has been dependent on the Russians. And so when somebody goes into space, America goes into space today, it's like you write a check for $80 million and deliver it to the Russians, so they'll give you the ride up and get you there. But the people we have now is an entirely different group. Almost so many of them have a PhD in one kind of science or medication or areas like that now. And I think out of, there's only like right now currently about 35 in the astronaut office, and I think there's only 10 of them that are qualified military pilots that came in from that. And the requirements are different. So you got all these other people, they're along for the ride a lot of times. Got to be equal in everything. Everybody is equal. That's what I was talking about earlier, because I'll be one of those people that tells you that no two people are equal in anything. But so, in many cases, it's justifiable to have give them the same results on it, depending on what you're trying to do. But you need to be having that drive to try to get ahead. I mentioned there's like 3 dozen astronauts today, and 10 of them are military pilots. And so NASA doesn't have the same 30 jets that we used to have down there to fly. And a lot more scientists, so in general, they're more technically informed, technically brighter than we were back in those days. But you've got to make sure that, you know, they have whites and blacks, ladies and men, various categories, foreign and domestic. So there's a different aspect that's going on, and that's not just the case with space. Our companies today are evolving. Many people today, most of the people, maybe even in here, they see that as a big plus. I'm one of those that still likes to see winners, losers, and to get up within an individual capability. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, on it. And here's a question right here.
Yep.
You had your hand up.
What would you do if you get sick in space?
What?
What would you do if you get sick in space?
What would I do if get taken what?
If you get sick, Walt.
Oh, if I got sick. Well, I was fortunate I didn't get sick, but I think the ground they thought we did, because Wally Schirra had a cold. And he had a bad cold, and it affected some of the attitudes between the ground and there. But the ground claimed they thought that we all had a cold, or maybe they were just taking this, trying to treat us all up there because we were exposed to it. But I never even coughed when I was up there. Don Isley, I think he did cough once or so. And then Wally Schirra, he managed to get past his cold symptoms after several days. But because of that cold, or they detected on that cold, that's why it impacted a lot of things we did right up to the end of the mission. They're amazed that we ended up being over 100% successful because of that. But we were not going to let anything like that interfere with our ability to do things. And today, you see some of the same things happening sometimes. But you asked about having the cold and how it affected us. It's caused some people to speak up, not be particularly thoughtful in what they had to say. And it really irritated the ground control and ground controllers. And I remember Isley and I, we had a little lecture to our commander. We tried to convince him to quit speaking up like he was to the ground. But those things can get to you. But now we've had people up there in the space station. The longest one was up there, I think, about 20 days shy of a year. The Russians had several people who went over a year. And whether we like it or not, the human bodies are showing some consequences of that when they get back now. So it's, today, these days, at least you get these launches to go up to satisfy, you go up to the space station, which is an amazing machine. And when they do that, they can always take supplies up and back and medications and what have you. So the world is getting better and better for this because they've been working on it. But it's also, it tends to be a bit discouraging on just trying to be the best one there. They want people to all get along, and that's what I see on that. Yes, sir.
When you left the atmosphere, what did it feel like?
When
When you left the Earth's atmosphere, what did it feel like?
I left the Earth, what was the feeling? That was good, because the public at large is, I can see why they're affected out there. I can't keep my fingers crossed that they don't have a problem when they're getting ready to go. But our concern was not getting off. Our concern was having to cancel it. Well, they did this or they did that. And I'll never forget, we have been working for 3 years training for that first manned Apollo mission. And when it came down to counting down, we were out there on the pad, and it was about, I think we lifted off at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. We were down to the last 15 minutes, and everything was going great. And the ground said they wanted to stop the clock so that we could change the pressure in one of our tanks by about 1 psi. And we've been following that. We weren't concerned about it, and we tried to keep them from doing that, and they says no, they did it. And so that ended up meaning we were 2 minutes and 30 seconds late. And the only thought that I could remember on that launch was, well, Wally publicly came out there and complained about the delay, but we looked at each other, and it's the only thing that fed us up about the launch. The launch was, from our perspective, we thought was great. And you just got to learn to put up with those kind of things. We've been flying for ages, but we certainly didn't expect a rocket ever to be like an airplane. So that was the only concern that we had during the launch. Now during re-entry, that was different. And it wasn't because of our spacecraft. The spacecraft was okay. And on re-entry, what happens, in general, you're coming back, and we had the first chute that came out that was fairly high up there, and then at 22,000 feet, you would get the initial attached to the parachutes to come out and stabilize you. You get down to about 12,000 feet, and your main chutes would open up. We had 3 chutes, and you might survive it with only 2, but 3 is what you really wanted to come out, and then you come down and splash down in the ocean. What happened with us is we were coming back, everything seemed to be fine on the re-entry, and we were getting down, we got in the clouds when we were about 40,000 feet. So out comes the initial chutes. We can't see them. There's so much clouds that we couldn't see them. So we thought, well, we hope they're open, but immediately we started timing for 10 or 15 seconds to see if the rate of descent was slightly affected because of those that opened, and they were. So we get down, and we knew that at about 11 or 12,000 feet, the main parachutes were going to come out. And of course, that makes a big change in the rate of descent. Couldn't see a thing. Didn't know if we had 2 chutes or 3 chutes, but we were timing on our hand watches, one like this, as a matter of fact, at the time, to see our rate of descent, and it was fine, about what we expected it to be, so I thought, we're okay. We finally broke out and could see the clouds at 500 feet. And so then we knew that we could have a little more control when we splashed down. But I'll never forget the fact that we were kind of concerned just because we couldn't see the chutes. And so other than that, it was very satisfying, the re-entry on it. Of course, then we had to stay. It took us a while because the spacecraft turned over, and you're hanging on in your harnesses, and so we had to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes. Had to get out and go down and turn on these bags to inflate them so it would turn the spacecraft back over. And the guy who was supposed to do that was Don Isley. And Don, I can remember, as he was unfastening himself, he says, "How do you guys feel?" So, fine. And he says, "I think I'm about ready to throw up." Which one of you guys is going to turn the inflation on? And Wally Schirra, who was the commander, he said, "Walt, get that." I mean, so I was a little bit worried there for a while, but I managed to get it on. Didn't really feel like throwing up, but I didn't feel very good going down there and turning it on either. So, and from that time on, it was a piece of cake. Up there? Yes. A little louder, please. Ever have to take anything?
Fix anything?
Huh?
Did you have to fix anything in space?
Oh, fix. We probably, we diddled around sometime with some of the switching if we hadn't gotten that particular problem before. But we had nothing really bad that we couldn't adjust the technique a little bit. Sometimes something might happen and you had to do kind of a workaround way, but we didn't have a whole lot. We'd spent so long trying to get that first spacecraft up that it was in pretty good shape. Now today, as time's gone on, and you've had another 150, 200 missions at least up there, some of them have had some serious problems and they've had to fix them. But I think we're getting more and more reliable on it. I don't encourage people in the program today to get overly hung up with their concern about the risk, because we do a better job all of the time at getting the spacecraft able to work. And we've had some wonderful missions. The weakest part of the space station is the people that are on there, that are operating that spacecraft and doing it for a long period of time. Whether you like it or not, and we're slowly, everybody's starting to finally accept and recognize that, the body is going to change in zero gravity, some people fairly quick. For example, Apollo 8 that went out around the moon, for example, one of the guys on board, he was sicker than a dog for, I don't know, 6 or 7 days, something like that. But you still got to do the work, so that's a bit of a problem. Because whether you like it or not, you're going to be throwing up, but you better learn how to catch it and not let it get all over the place. They fail at that every once in a while. Okay, well, I'm going to get up there at the top. Oh, no, they were just waiting. You got it.
What level of physics did you learn while
Can you speak louder, please?
Nice and loud.
what level of physics did you learn when you were you just started college?
When I was what?
What level of physics did you learn while you were in college? Like
What level? Well, I was essentially an A student, but I didn't waste a lot of time on, I had to have at least 2 languages, and I didn't waste a lot of time on German and French. I didn't try Japanese, which was our other choice out there. I think today it's more and more reality to be capable and competent of at least one other language. I have never been able to personally conclude that in science, where you've got to have at least 2 languages, foreign languages, for your doctorate. I'm not sure how useful it used to be. I had French and German. I couldn't do a thing in French these days, and German a little bit. And when I was in high school, I had some Spanish. So now that I go into McDonald's in the morning, and almost everybody there is Mexican, and I can practice my Spanish a little bit. But it's good and helpful to be able to communicate around the world in different languages. But I don't like to see it where the whole operation is dependent on the change in languages. And the people that are today in the space program, they're doing very well adjusting and handling that. That's not a real problem for them. The other thing that I can never think about it, because now that we're, for at least the last 5 years, we've been totally dependent on the Russians to get up there to the space station. And it's gotten down to the bargain price of $80 million for that ride. That kind of bothers me a little bit. I'd rather have our own capability. So I really encourage people to do the best they can and try to be the best in that class. You may not be, and so what? But if you're trying to be there near the top, it's going to work out better for you in your life than being low. And you know, I didn't talk like that 60, 70 years ago when I was in college all the time. I worked hard, but as I've gotten older and watched how the industry has come, how the industry has changed, that's when I come to realize and depend more and more on the fact that you really ought to be willing to pay the price and do the best you can. Everybody is not a winner, so try to do the best you can to get there.
We'll do 2 more questions, okay, Walt?
Well, I'll get a couple up here.
Okay.
Up there,
What was the worst part of being in space?
what was the worst part about being in space? Well, it's simple, having to go to the bathroom. I'm sure, I bet this is going to be interesting. Have any of you read my book? You got it? No. Well, I'll tell you, in there, I was the first one in our crew, about the second day, or maybe the third, I was fortunate, that went to the bathroom. I'm talking about the right attitude about doing it. It was the third day. And when we got through, I wrote up a full page of recommendations for it, which is in my book, still selling 42 years after I wrote it. But it was, to me, it was one of the best things that we could figure out how to do, how to handle that. Because when you're in space, the human body's been around for a long time, and you've got to get it adjusted so it can use the stuff you've got out there. And going to the bathroom, we allowed at least an hour to do that. And following the Apollo 1 fire, the best change that the guys on the crew liked was they added 3 oxygen masks to the cabin, and it was on the thin possibility that they might have another fire, and they thought they'd have that. That's not when they used it. They used it only for the important thing, the smell. Okay. I got to get one more over here. I haven't been looking over there. Yes, ma'am. What?
When did you realize that you wanted to become an astronaut?
Well, I'll never forget the first time when I got to that point, because I had been a fighter pilot, I was in the squadron, and I was working part-time at the RAND Corporation. And on May 5th, 1961, on May 5th, 1961, I was driving from San Fernando Valley up over the Santa Monica Mountains. No freeways out there then. And it was a little before 7 because I was working part-time for a couple of hours in the morning at the RAND Corporation. And I was listening, driving my car, and that was a little before 10 down in Florida at Cocoa Beach. That was May 5th. And at that time, the very first Mercury mission they were trying to get ready to go, Alan Shepard was in it. As I was listening, and I was driving, it got down to the last couple of minutes and I could not drive anymore. I pulled over the side of the road and I parked. It was down to the last 5 minutes. And I'll never forget, when it got down to the last couple minutes, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. And I heard this voice screaming around me. It says, you lucky SOB. But it was pronounced, it wasn't spelled out. And I thought somebody must have been screaming. And I looked around and it was me. I'm the guy that was sitting there saying that. 2 years later, Alan Shepard and I, we were sharing an office. But that was kind of the point that came up that made me decide, whatever it takes, I'm going to be trying to do that job.
Last question.
One more?
One more.
Well, she was first up there. Sorry. A little louder, please. What was it like on the moon? I never got to go to the moon, but the people that did, they all found it was different here, but they also found it quite adjustable and quite acceptable. It was the environment it was the land around it that would cause a lot of problems. And eventually they had a vehicle that they could rove around on it. By the time, I think the last 3 missions had that. It was a very satisfying thing for them. And they had to be careful physically because you're down to, here we got 1G, and when you're on the surface there, you've got, what is it, down to 16G? I can't remember what the G load is on the moon right now. And you also, what you're wearing on that suit that we had, when we put that suit on with the survival gear on the back and what have you, it was about, I think, 180 or 190 pounds here. But if you got into 16G, for example, look at you're down to about 30, 40 pounds. That all helps on it. So they could get around easy, but it was kind of difficult with all that mass on you to make sure you had the right balance, which was kind of tough. And I guess I'm getting fired for having talked too long. And I'm sorry that if I haven't talked about things you were interested in. Thank you.